go home because of the late hour. Ms. Vadakonda brought up earlier her support of the upcoming, I thought we were having a presentation tonight too, FLE recommendations. But in particular, I share deeply a concern that FLECAC is not representative of the community. I am worried particularly at the exclusion of parents' voice. I do note that the state standards, the first line in the state standards on what the family life education program should look like, the very first line says, a community involvement team or school health advisory board shall be identified and should include persons such as a person from central office, an elementary school principal, a middle school principal, a high school principal, teachers, a school board member, which we don't have, parents, plural, one or more members of the clergy, so that's okay for the State Board of Education, a member of the medical profession, a mental health practitioner, and others in the community. The student representative on the FLECAC appoints, which is a committee of the superintendent, not of the board, because it's a curriculum committee. The student representative, who is a non-voting member of this board, and frankly a non-voting member of the public, appoints 4 people to FLECAC. 4 students are on there representing a 400% increase in the voice that any one of us as elected officials and voting members of this board have. So I worry about that. I worry that parents are clearly indicated in the second line from the state standards that says that there must be evidence of broad-based community involvement and the opportunity for parents and others. I mean, parents are mentioned yet again in the second line. And to my knowledge of a committee that's, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 people large, there are fewer than a handful, and maybe even smaller than that, and down into the very small single digits of people on that board who are current FCPS parents. Not teachers who, are there in their role representing as teachers or other staff members who may have a child in our system, but people who are there to represent a current view from a parent perspective that is diverse, that is equitable, that is socially and religiously sensitive to a broad base of concerns in a county where we have people from 160 countries and 200 languages, and we have sought a greater student voice than any member of this board. And so I do look to the superintendent and beseech that we be reflective of the parent voice and add a medical health practitioner to it, and also have representatives of the clergy and others that may be missing. And so I will work with my colleagues to the greatest extent that we achieve real equity and real authentic public engagement on something rather than sluice something through in the coming meetings as we discuss those recommendations and any potential vote thereafter.
Ms. Hines, thank you. I'm sure Mrs. Schultz does not intend to give offense, but I was elected by my constituents because they trust me to make decisions such as naming people to advisory committees, and to do that in a way that is responsible and that reflects the values of my constituency. And I know very well personally the person who I have named to FLECAC. I know that he represents the values of my community. I know that he represents a particular religious tradition. Personally, he does, but more than that, he represents the values of the people of the Hunter Mill District. I really have no doubt about that. And I think the concern that 4 students on that committee is too many It's true that no one of us school board members get to appoint 4 people, but the 12 of us appoint 12 people. So that's 12 school board member appointees compared to 4 students. So, you know, the students are obviously well outnumbered by adults on that committee. I don't think we have too many students. So I would take issue with Mrs. Schultz's comments.
Are not fun. And so with that, I think that I'd like to express my disappointment that we weren't able to have the FLECAC presentation today, which was on the agenda. And though it is a very difficult topic, many people came out tonight and presented on that topic. And for those people watching at home, it was left sort of out of context without receiving the FLECAC presentation. I understand we'll receive that. I hope, Dr. Brabrand, that this year's report includes 3 members dissenting position on the FLECAC recommendations. I hope that those members are allowed to present to the board, as we've done for previous committees. For example, the Jeb Stewart Committee had 2 reports that were presented. I think it would be helpful for the board to be able to ask questions as to why they felt the need to write a dissenting report, which is quite detailed, and I encourage everyone to take the time to read it. I think there are a number of very good questions that were asked tonight with regards to FLECAC. I think the question of why was there a vote to remove the reference to clergy, that is something that I think many in the community would wonder about. And I think Ms. Schultz does make a valid point that the student member of this board, a non-voting member, has 4 times the appointees as any individual board member here. But most importantly, I think that the issue that I think rings through the FLECAC presentation is a sense within the community, the parent community, that although they may have an opportunity for input, essentially their opinions are dismissed and not taken seriously, and especially if they're inconsistent with proposed changes to the Family Life Education Committee. To make it meaningful, we absolutely have to have real input, and maybe we need a public hearing to allow folks to express their opinions. I have a number of particular questions that I would have asked Ms. Payne if she had presented, and I'll present those next week. But I guess the most significant is fundamentally, do we believe as an organization, FCPS, that biological sex no longer matters? This is a really fundamental question. We're talking about Mother's Day tonight. And, I think my own mom asked me after raising 7 kids, could she still be a man? And she was asking it obviously jokingly, because of course she doesn't believe that. But I think the community owes an answer to that question. Do we believe that? Could I be a mother at this point in my life at 52? I think that's a legitimate question that we have to answer that question. And I think part of the answer is going to be explained by where our curriculum committee in developing the curriculum draws on their sources. What resources do they draw upon to develop them? And when the FLECAC committee votes to make a change, does the staff representative on FLECAC feel it's incumbent on her to present those to the board? Because I think the most controversial changes were actually made by committee members and not proposed by the staff. And my question would be, does the staff actually agree with all of the changes that were proposed in the revised curriculum? Lastly, I think I have to talk a little bit about the structure and process of the FLE committee. FLE committee meetings are typically, as far as I know, always scheduled on nights we have board meetings. As many of you probably know, I took time on February 8th to attend the FLECAC meeting, and was quite surprised at the process that was used by the committee to extinguish conversations on topics that dissenting members of the committee wanted to have discussed, motions. And so those techniques were quite troubling, calling the question after, really before anyone had a chance to make any input on a proposal. And I'm not alone in my reaction to how that meeting was handled, and I don't know about subsequent meetings, but in the audience that night, public audience, a writer who I published an article online, and he described it this way. He said, one citizen member made a motion to remove the phrase sex assigned at birth from the lessons and simply use the word sex. Through parliamentary maneuvers, other members of the committee made sure the amendment was put off indefinitely without debate. The vote to cut off debate and never speak about it again passed 23-3. The member who offered the amendment asked for a roll call so that those voting to keep in sex assigned at birth would have their names associated with their vote. The motion for the roll call vote was killed by voice vote. No debate, no accountability. Another citizen member made a motion that somewhere in the numerous lessons about various contraceptive methods taught beginning in 8th grade, there ought to be something about the possible health risks of certain contraceptives. This too was shut down without debate by a vote of 23-3. A roll call of the vote was shouted down by voice votes. I think that description reflects a broken committee. And I think what Mrs. Schultz was talking about, the lack of parents on the committee with children in our school system, is reflected in that sort of committee behavior. I don't know why the behavior was permitted, since it's a staff-run committee, but it was frankly embarrassing. And I do believe that members of the community have videoed the actions of that committee, and those videos are now online and in the public forum. So we definitely need to make changes to that committee so that we can feel and know that the FCPS committee is, in fact, operating in a manner that is consistent with best practices for citizen advisory committees. Because I think what was demonstrated to me, at least, in that committee room was a committee that, in fact, was not interested in discussing difficult topics. And so I hope that everyone on Monday, that we can have these difficult conversations. These are important conversations for many, many families, many of whom demonstrated that tonight by coming out and taking time to present to us. There's just a lot. It's not simply an emotional topic. It's an important topic. It's not simply a spiritual topic. It's a medical topic. And I think we owe it to the community to have this conversation, to allow the public to have their input as much as the public would like. And I think we need to honor the wishes of our parents. And maybe that means to have a consent opt-in, so that we don't have the situation where parents feel like, well, they didn't give consent to this. Just because they didn't opt out doesn't mean they consented to the instruction that was provided to them. I think that's a very powerful point, and we need to talk about it and see whether or not that's a feasible mechanism to put in place. And with that, I'll finish. Thank you.